So what source are we using today, Barbara?
Today we are going to pick from a book. Actually, it's not a card. We're picking from a book called Some. It is authored by David Eagleman. And I heard about him on Brené Brown's podcast. So you really should go listen to that episode if you haven't listened to it already. So this is Some. And the subtitle says 40 Tales from the Afterlife. So, Linda, pick a number between 1 and 40, and then I'll read that chapter.
27.
Ooh. It's called Prism, page 72. Prism. God resolved at the outset that he wanted every human to participate in the afterlife. But the plans weren't thought out to completion, and immediately he began to run up against some confusion about age. How old should each person be in the afterlife? Should this grandmother exist here at her age of death, or should she be allowed to live as a young woman, recognizable to her first lover, but not to her granddaughter? He decided it was unfair to keep people the age they were at the end of their lives, when much of their beauty and alacrity had been worn down. Allowing everyone to live as a young adult proved an unviable solution because the afterlife quickly degenerated into unbounded sexual pursuits. And at Middle Ages, they talked only about their children and mortgages, making conversations in the afterlife tedious. God finally landed on an ingenious solution while watching light diffract through a prism. So, when you arrive here, you're split into your multiple selves at all possible ages. The you that existed as a single entity is now all ages at once. These pieces of you no longer get older, but remain ageless into perpetuity. The yous have transcended time. This takes some getting used to. The different beams of you might run into each other at the grocery store, like separate people do in the earth life. Your 76-year-old self may revisit its favorite creek and run into your 11-year-old self. Your 28-year-old self may break up with a lover in a diner and notice your 35-year-old self visiting that spot, lingering on the air of regret hanging over the empty seat. Typically, the different yous are happy to see each other because they possess the same name and a shared history. But the yous are more critical of yourself than they are of others. And so each of you quickly identifies habits that get under your skin. It's a fact of afterlife. Don't be surprised to discover that after decomposition into your different ages, the different yous tend to drift apart. You discover that the you of 8 years old has less in common than expected with the you of 42 and the you of 64. The 18-year-old you finds more in common with other 18-year-olds than with your 73-year-old you. The 73-year-old you doesn't mind a bit seeking out meaningful conversations with others of the same generation. Beyond the name, the yous have little else in common. But don't lose hope. The shared resume of life, parents, birthplace, hometown, school years, first kiss, has a magnetic, nostalgic pull. So once in a while, the different yous organize a gathering, like a family reunion, bringing together all your ages into a single room. At these reunions, the middle-aged will delightfully pinch the cheeks of the young, and the teenagers will politely listen to the stories and advices of the elderly. These reunions reveal a group of individuals touchingly searching for a common theme. They appeal to your name as a unifying structure, but they come to realize that the name that exists on Earth, the you that moved serially through these different identities, was like a bundle of sticks from different trees. They come to understand with awe the complexity of the compound identity that existed on Earth. They conclude with a shudder that the earthly you is utterly lost, unpreserved in the afterlife. You were all these ages, they concede, and you were none. And
Okay, Barbara. So how does that resonate for you as you read that?
well, it's interesting, you know, this book really, every story is a different perspective on the afterlife. So it might help to say, you know, there's a little summary in the beginning that says David Eagleman grew up in New Mexico. As an undergraduate, he majored in British and American literature at Rice University before earning his PhD in neuroscience at Baylor College of Medicine. He currently runs a neuroscience research lab where he studies time perception, synesthesia, and how neuroscience will influence the legal system. At night, he writes fiction. So what inspires me about this idea is that we can perceive all ages and stages of our life from whatever vantage point we're in at any given time. And I've done work in my own life where I've written letters to myself, and I've done this in a variety of different ways over my years, and it's profound every time. It's profound. And to some degree, I believe that I have always heard the wisdom of my inner muse. I don't know if it's a coalition of all of these parts and pieces of me, but I don't really think so. So that story kind of just makes me reflect on fragmenting in a different way. So when we have trauma and our personalities fragment, or if a trauma is such that we have PTSD or for whatever reason suppress the memory or whatever that happened within the trauma, you know, I just have this sense that we can always find our way to an inner wisdom within it all. And knowing the work that you and I do with virtues, it completely makes sense to me that we are all these fragments of us, all these varying degrees of us. I don't really see them as fragments. I see them as varying degrees of us, like, you know, facets on a diamond, for instance. I just see each one independently as its own whole piece of a bigger tapestry, you know, if you will. And it really gives me great hope that together, in, you know, if I am conscious and unifying in my inner relationship, if I treat myself and all of those facets of me with an equal degree of honor and respect that I'm giving to that wisdom, then I feel like that's where healing is. That's where, you know, it doesn't matter that the perpetrator make amends with me as much as it matters that I am able to make amends for myself and bring myself to a place of understanding and unity around it, I guess. And, you know, as we know, we don't necessarily want to be fixed. We want to be heard, and we want to be seen, and we want to be acknowledged. And so this, to me today, you know, I just think it's a reminder that the prism, we are the prism. We are the prism. And if we identify with being fragmented, we will be fragmented, and those pieces will be separate. And I think it will be like a journey every time we have to try and find one. But if we see ourselves as united and maybe just disengaged with each other or distanced or something like that, then I think the unity is, it's not so much of a stretch to get into a place of integration, which in my mind is where all these things come together and I realize that I am the being in the prism. And interesting that you would pick this. I just want to make this final point. Interesting that you would pick that particular title. This morning I was doing some writing, and the photo I chose is a picture of a very colorful collection of tangled colored ribbons that come out into a prism of individual lines of color. So, and I really identified with that in terms of all these different facets and layers of fidelity. So this all came from a post on 100 Virtues for 100 Days, which posted the virtue of fidelity. And the question was, you know, how are you, how does fidelity feel for you? And it hit me like a core wound. And I started writing, and I was way too open and out there to hit post. So I cut it out, like a copy cut. And I went to my blogger and I started the blog page, episode, edit, whatever you want to call it. And then I just put something about being down a rabbit hole. You know, this takes me down a rabbit hole, and there's a lot to see down here. But yeah, it's just interesting, the untangling of who we are. Yeah. That was a lot to say. Wilson.
Yes. So I hear your incredible, gentle acceptance of the importance of appreciating all the facets of self and finding pathways to integrating them all, to have that acceptance of all of self.
Thank you, Lynda.
You're welcome.
How about for you? What stood out?
Well, as you were reading through the processes that he felt you would go through, you know, that he's writing about, that you would go through in the afterlife in terms of meeting the different memories and different ages and stages of self. And I was like, uh, I don't think you have to wait till the afterlife till that starts. So,
Yeah.
um, because I find myself at this point just out of nowhere, memories popping up and people popping up that I haven't thought of, or they didn't even necessarily have any major uh, place in my, like they were. They passed through my life. I passed through their life without any real major connection, um, and yet it comes up and but I love how he talks about the recognition that the younger self is happy with younger people and the teenage self is
Mm.
happy with teenage people, and that the 70-year-old is happy with the people of their generation, and that not necessarily that happy with you know the 70-year-olds, not necessarily that want to spending that much time with the 6-year-old or whatever, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that sounds so like um, what can happen. And yet I also know some people in their 70s who just love, and I'm one of them. I love being around younger people. I still prefer their company to um, many people my age. Um, and I think it's because of the curiosity, more openness to exploring. Um, Sometimes easier to get through, even the teenagers, that often people in my generation will always, and it's been ever thus, it's, the generation before me and before them and before them will often look at the younger, teenage kids who are kind of coming into their own, going to that next stage of separation from adult authority and into their own authority, will often find it challenging to be with them. But I find that if when you're in a situation where you can actually be with them in something that is of interest to them, that it's just amazing to spend that time, to be with them in that place where they're able to be creative and share their love of something, their interest in something. And I find it easier to break through than people my age who are fixed in negativity sometimes, which is sad and it's hard and yeah. So um, and then I have to admit that I am fixed in my ways. So it's a I enjoy reading it. I would like to read it again sometime. Um, to examine it more closely because it really does resonate, and it's a good introduction to the rest of the book. It's funny, I don't know why I chose 27 until after you said something about that number, and then I thought, oh yeah, 2 and 7 is 9, 3 times 9 is 27. Like numerically there's all sorts of stuff, and then to have it be the prism number, which of course that has to do with threes too, I gather, mathematically. And then it made me think of how I have these crystals hanging in my windows now, and the sunlight, when it comes through in the afternoon, I have these prisms, the colors on my wall in different places, and how much I enjoy that. And so the prism, and it makes me think of the kaleidoscope and um, just the beauty that comes from all the different facets. And then if you think of each of us as individuals, all being these different prisms with the light shining through us from different angles and different places and reflecting the different aspects. And if we're challenged to integrate self, all the aspects of self, it makes it quite understandable why we sometimes find it so challenging to come together in unity, um, with all these different flashes, prisms flashing their light and their colors, and I don't know, it makes me think of the old disco ball thing happening. Or yeah, some of those old light shows and things. So it's yeah, it could be very disorienting and very taking a lot of letting go of one's own control issues to be able to appreciate the beauty in the flashing and the clashing of prism things as they cross and integrate between people as well as within people. So, yeah, fun.
I love your optimism and the ability to be able to sort of look across the span of your life and sum it up in a way that pulls it together, that makes sense in the now. Yeah. And just, I appreciate so much your, just the ability to, dive deep into these little rabbit holes with me and go mining for the gems. It's a beautiful copacetic relationship that we have here, and I love your sensitivity to what's really going on.